Hi, I'm Robert from Bishop's Family Cycles here in Victoria and our shop in Vancouver. And today we're going to talk a little bit about biking with passengers in an urban environment, primarily kids and dogs, because that's what we do the most of. If you have more questions about just cargo bike styles in general, check out some of our other videos where we'll talk about types of cargo bikes. For us, our cargo bikes all have very specific kind of ways to ride these bikes. They have age limits for seat requirements. They have different accessories for different age kids or pets. And the BC code for cycling requires your bike to be designed to carry the passengers you're carrying. And so it's important to understand that you kind of need to follow what the manufacturer says to meet the rules of the road. The bikes we have different ways to ride. So when you look at longtails, for example, longtails say anyone under the age of 5 or 5 or below has to be in some sort of baby seat. And those are those 5-point harness seats that you hook to the rack. They think that their kid's 3 or 4 and they can slap them on the rack and that's gonna be okay. That's gonna be up to your judgment, but if you wanna follow the rules of the road, we recommend staying in that twilly seat until they've fully outgrown it. After 5 on longtails, typically you would move to a safety bar situation. So rather than sitting just on a seat pad with a handlebar, most manufacturers would recommend that you have a safety bar that wraps all the way around your passengers. And that's usually up until the age of 7 or 8. But then after that 8 years of age, typically you can move to a handlebar or more of just a hanging on sort of situation. Some of the important things to think about on longtails are spokes are a very large hazard for passengers on the back of your bike. So you wanna make sure that you have some sort of wheel guard. Footrests or foot pegs. Your passengers need to have some place to put their feet so that they're not dangling out and grabbing hazards as they ride. Those are all things to think about on longtails. For box bikes, they're often a little bit more straightforward. They tend to have seats and seat belts that are pretty apparent of how many passengers you can ride with. And that goes up to a certain age as well. So they'll say your passengers need to be buckled in until X age. And then after that, most manufacturers don't necessarily require a harness or a buckle. That's gonna be up to your judgment. Some just put in lap belts for comfort. It's really important to understand how each bike is meant to carry. Other things to think about would be riding with your pets. Generally, dogs can be pretty well trained to ride anywhere, but when you're learning with your dog, it's very important to have a restraint, so some sort of harness and leash. The bikes we sell that are designed specifically for dogs usually have an eyelet of some sort to attach the leash to. It's important to make sure that your dog can't jump out. You don't want your dog to be able to jump out in an unsafe environment. So it's important to make sure that you restrain them properly until they're well trained inside that bike. Starting young is obviously the first tip, but there are some treat training and positive reinforcement methods to get your dog comfortable in these different bikes. So now that we've talked about how to properly put your passengers in these bikes, let's talk a little bit about kind of rules of the road and etiquette. Most of the time riding with cargo bikes, you're gonna run a ride in bike lanes, right? These are large bikes, you're carrying passengers, you are carrying your most precious cargo. So riding in protected bike lanes, first of all, the AAA infrastructure will usually feel the best. We will often go out of our way to make sure we stay in that infrastructure. So sometimes you have shared streets where you have the ability to take up most of the road because these streets are bike prioritized. And so even though the law says you need to be as far right as possible, you also need to keep yourself safe. So feel free to take up the lane in those bike-focused roads. Something we often talk about with people on e-bikes is there's lots of grumpiness with different speeds of bicycles. So you have traditional bicycles, you have e-bikes, you have e-cargo bikes, you have scooters and road cyclists. You have all these different users using this road. Think about how you would want people to act, right? Just because your bike can go 32 kilometers an hour doesn't mean that it's always safe to. Other things to think about with these bikes is as they get heavier, you are gonna notice that your braking distance gets longer. So it's important to think about how far back you're gonna follow people to be able to stop in time. When you're riding protected bike lanes, there's often things that people don't think about. Things like turning left. Left turns are one of the most dangerous things you can do, and that's no different on a bicycle. In these bike lanes and the way they're designed is you're gonna actually go straight through the intersection when the light's green, and you're gonna pull over to the right and pause for the next light cycle to turn left. Lots of intersections with good infrastructure will have a green box painted for you to park there with a bike. And it's important to realize that even if there's other bikes waiting, you have priority to pull right in front of them and wait to turn left. That's what that space is for. And that's why the stop line in the bike lanes is further back. And so using those jug handles may feel unnatural at first, but it really is the safest way to cross through intersections. So sometimes these would be called jug handles. So when you think about it, you have a jug with that little teeny tiny hook at the top. If you're on a road with a shoulder bike lane, you are required to be in that shoulder bike lane unless there's an obstruction there. And so it is important to understand that unfortunately the rules change for us as cyclists based on the road we're on. And we're going to think hard about kind of those best paths. Like I said, I often will go out of my way to stay in AAA infrastructure, and that's all ages and abilities. And the idea there is that that is meant to be safe and protected from the more dangerous road users, which are cars. Here in Victoria, I often see folks riding on the main road where they were used to riding before we got all this wonderful infrastructure. And I often want to just roll my window down and be like, hey, you know, if you went 2 blocks that way, you'd be on a wide open road where cars can't ride and you'd have a much more pleasant ride. And those folks just don't know that yet because they haven't ridden it. And so mapping out your route to find that AAA in the place you are can go a really long way. Hopefully, somewhere down the road will be the grid system for our bikes and the cars can zig and zag wherever they need to, but that's not where we're at yet. We've talked a lot about AAA infrastructure in this video, and we talk about how that's my preferred place to ride. What can be hard sometimes though is we're all used to using products on our phone to map, and we think because it has a bicycle icon that it's going to give us the best place to ride, and that, in my experience, is often not the case. What I can say for us here in Victoria is we have the CRD bicycle map, and that's constantly being updated digitally. And so downloading that to your phone can really help you find those safe places to ride. Other resources would be, there are different apps. So there's a transit app that does really good biking. Bosch has its own app. There's lots of different resources out there. And it's important to find those resources to help map your safe infrastructure. Paint is going to also be an important thing that's going to tell you where you're allowed to be. So here in Victoria and generally in North America, green paint is what dictates places where bikes are crossing through dangerous spots and where some of those turns are going to be. So when you look, every intersection we have here in Victoria and most of them in Vancouver will have green paint in the bike lanes across intersections. And so that's so cars understand that bikes will be passing through that intersection. They'll also have green paint inside those jug handle turns. So that's actually a place where a bike could stop and wait for the light to turn. Victoria here, and I hate to even say this on video, but we're a little bit of a cycling gem. We had a very forward-looking mayor about 8 years ago who pushed through safe infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists. And it's the reason my shop can exist here. It's the reason we have so many non-cyclists choosing cargo bikes as your mode of transit. If you live in Victoria proper or Esquimalt or Vic West, you're in a place where you're going to have protected infrastructure for your entire ride, and we're fortunate that way. So the last piece that I kind of want to talk about is just the weather and the elements. So you're going to have rain covers and different things on all of these. Know that rain covers on your bicycles will change the visibility of your bike. And so it's important to kind of ride with that before you're, late in the morning for your commute and make sure you can see the difference in how these bikes ride. As the bike gets bigger, so rain covers on long tails especially, they'll act as a big sail. And so if you're riding in windy conditions and things like that, your bike is going to handle differently. And so as we've talked about in this video and lots of our other videos, what we really want to think about is what your specific cargo is going to be 80% of the time. And so whether it's kids or pets or a fellow adult passenger, you need to understand if the bike you want is going to be able to do what you want to do. The best way to do that is to talk to your local bike shop that sells these bikes because they're going to really know the ins and outs of what the manufacturer says. If you're unfortunate and don't have a cargo bike shop where you are, you can always take a look at the manufacturer's websites because they will specify how to ride with each passenger. You're going to feel the most safe if you're riding in the way that the manufacturer recommends.